Yes, we are in the Tongass National Forest, and the ocean is right here. The mountains rise quite steeply. Blueberry brush, huckleberry bushes, and salmonberry bushes and alders are thick, but we hike up and through and hunt Sitka blacktail and grouse. We've talked about whitewater kayaking. We've woven in yoga, and join us this week for the conversation on the trail less traveled.
Hello listeners, Mandela here. I'm excited to announce that I've been in the recording studio working on an album with my good friend Steve Saroff. We just released our first single, and you can support our music by simply adding the song to your playlist on Spotify or Apple Music. To find our music, search for Didgeridoo River Meditation under the artist name Mandela van Eden.
Hi folks, my name is Chris and I'm the artist and co-founder at Explorer Maps. My brother Greg and I produced our first map about 11 years ago, doing the map of Montana, and our list of maps has grown from 1 to our current tally of over 65.
Which map will you get to help you treasure your own special times? Please be sure to use the promo code Mandela for a discount when you visit explorermaps.com.
Welcome to The Trail Less Traveled, an adventure radio series and podcast dedicated to collecting stories and sounds from around the world in order to take you back to mankind's earliest form of entertainment, storytelling. This episode was recorded on location in collaboration with Explorer Maps. Missoula, Montana is a mecca for outdoor enthusiasts, and each week we will bring you tales of adventure from both near and far, as well as information and inspiration and a few tunes to set the mood. You can subscribe to the podcast and learn about our international outreach projects at traillesstraveled.net. And now, here's your host, International Expedition Guide, Conservationist, and Yogi, Mandela.
Today, The Trail Less Traveled is being recorded in Juneau, Alaska. We are at the Yoga Path Yoga Studio here in Juneau. I know that right now I'm wearing slightly damp merino wool after a beautiful hike that was straight up and down through a temperate rainforest, and it was just a phenomenal way to start the day. But we're here at the yoga studio, which has been owned and operated by my guest, Jody Dixon, for the past 7 years. Jody Dixon has been living here in Juneau for 20 years. She's originally from Jasper, Alberta. Jody has an amazing background. I know that I'm very inspired by her, and we have a lot in common too. Jody was a professional whitewater kayaker for 6 years. That way of interacting with rivers took her all over the world. She's been practicing yoga for over 20 years, and she is also an avid hunter and angler. And she started hunting in 2013, diving right in by starting with a Dall sheep hunt. So all of these topics we'll investigate and explore throughout this episode. But I just wanted to first say thank you, Jody, for sharing Alaska with us just so epically on this first morning here by taking us on the hike, and also making time and energy to join me on the Trail Less Traveled.
You are welcome. Thanks for having me, Mandela.
My first question for you is, where did you grow up, and how was adventure a part of your childhood?
I feel like I am so lucky to have started very young, like 2, 3, when my family bought an outfitting business in Jasper, Alberta, and we ran ski trips in the wintertime and horse trips in the summertime to cabins on Amethyst Lake, and that was just like how I grew up. That I didn't, when you're young, you don't realize that how you're growing up is different than other ways that people grow up. And into my teens, I definitely started to realize how special it was. And the adventure of being in the backcountry for days and days, and throughout the summer, just weeks and months. Like, we were in the backcountry all summer long. And even after my parents shifted and did a different business, I still continued with adventure in the backcountry with the whitewater kayaking and just camping and hiking and a little bit of rock climbing here and there, and just always had that call to be outside and trying new things and moving my body in different ways, and ended up in Alaska, and somehow all of that just merged into hunting. And the last 10 years, that's really been the key focus of my time. And with my husband, we just look forward to our hunts. That's every year, all year, that's what we look forward to.
Beautiful. Jody, I would like to stand up with you. We've been sitting down for a little bit, and I want to walk over to the window where we can see the Tongass National Forest. I was wondering if you might be able to paint the picture about what the Tongass Forest looks like from your perspective here today, what's happening with the clouds, and a little bit more about that forest and this area of Alaska that we're in right now.
Yeah, the view here from any window that you get to see the green spaces around our town, which there are many, are pretty special. Generally, you've got this, saltwater to then very steep mountains, lots of trees up to about 2,000 feet, and the clouds always change. Often it is very cloudy, but they also bring a lot of character and mystical feel. When you're walking through them, it's quite mystical. But even looking up at the mountains right now, we're looking at Thunder Mountain, and the top of it is in clouds, but they're always moving through the trees, and different parts of the ridge open up to be viewed, and it's spectacular.
Now, we did an amazing hike this morning, going through the forest and eating berries along the way. Can you tell us a little bit about foraging in this forest?
Yes, we have an abundant opportunity to forage. I feel like I'm a novice forager, and even so, I can pick so many things that I feel like are easy to identify. We've got huckleberries, black, blue, and red huckleberries that are prime for picking at this time of year, and we have salmon berries that have just kind of wrapped up. And then in the spring, there's fiddleheads and all kinds of other little greens that you can pick and eat. And spruce tips are popular for people to pick and do different things. And in the fall, it'll shift to lots of mushrooming. And again, I feel like I'm a novice at a lot of these things and plant identification. There's so many plants. And yet, even as a novice person, I feel like there's many that can be easily identified and safely consumed and put away to enjoy all winter. I dried about 12 quart mason jars of mushrooms last fall, and have been enjoying them all through the winter. It brings a special touch to any meal when you have these locally foraged foods.
Above us, as we record the show, there's a bald eagle flying. And across the street, you can see the rack of a moose. And I have been amazed by the abundance here. You've used that word, and I've used that word a lot while I've been here. And I've just been blown away by how people forage and they hunt and they fish. And it seems like a lot of the times a common thread is not necessarily buying your meat from the grocery store. That's like more of a special treat. This you got, and you hunt it yourself.
Yes. And as we, stand in my yoga studio, I've heard comments, something along the lines from people who are visiting this area and have come to a yoga class and are hearing conversations after a class about, hunting. And they said things like, I've never heard so much talk of hunting in the lobby of a yoga studio. But what I think is different about this community is that people realize eating local, hunting your own food is very respectful for the land around you. You're very connected, and that's a big part, I feel, of any yoga practice. You're looking to have a union with your divine creator, or a union with what is special and what is around you. And hunting and foraging is just such an amazing way to be connected with what is special around you.
I definitely want to talk to you more about the hunting and fishing that you do in this part of Alaska, but you mentioned the area, and there might be someone listening who's never been to Alaska. Can you tell us about Southeast Alaska? And we're looking out the window here at the Tongass National Forest, but not too far from here is saltwater. I can even smell it in the air when I step outside.
If you look at a map where Southeast Alaska is, we're really this long finger that comes down along the west side of British Columbia, and there's places that we go and we are up high, and you look across on a map and you're like, oh, that's Canada right over there. So I think people can imagine Alaska just being like so far north, but Southeast Alaska is similar to British Columbia in a lot of ways. And, being on the ocean, we do have a fairly mild climate, but also quite wet. And people new to this area, it's challenging to get in the backcountry and to stay dry. So we just figure out a way to manage how wet and muddy we get. And you learn to tolerate the discomfort so that you can be out and, hiking amongst these very old trees. And you mentioned something earlier that I was able to learn that the Tongass National Forest has old growth that is 800 years old. And I've definitely hiked along huge, big trees and just wanted to hug them. But, my arms feel so little going just partway around them. It's big, the feeling you get and the things that you see, the mountains and the trees. It's a big experience.
I would love to talk to you now about hunting and conservation and living off the land.
I did dabble a little bit in some grouse hunting before we went on our first sheep hunt, but definitely the sheep hunt in 2013 was a big, beautiful, amazing start to big game hunting and hunting in general with my husband, who's also here today. I've spent a lot of time in the backcountry and done a lot of really, wonderful adventures and some, extreme sports, and hunting has a different way of capturing your focus. And I didn't understand it until I had truly experienced it, because my husband Shane wasn't always, keen to just hike when we weren't hunting. And I didn't totally understand. I'm like, hiking is great. But after having been on a hunt like that, the intensity of your focus and the experience of, bringing down a big game animal, and you go to them and you put your hands on them and they're still warm and they're magnificent and you're thrilled that you've killed this animal, but you are so grateful and in awe of it. And then for your body to just work so hard and carry heavy weight and think, I don't know how I'm going to make it all the way, but you do. You have this primal instinct of, you can just do it. And it's pretty amazing to observe that shift in me of oh, okay, this is, to now just go hiking can be a bit anticlimactic. And it's still wonderful, but the experience of hunting has increased my observation skills. So I feel like I just on any basic hike, I observe wildlife a little more, or observe sign, tracks, scat, and I'm really grateful for that experience and what it's brought to my life, and how when we bring the meat home and there's so much care taken in saving everything and using as much of it as we can, and to start putting together food that is meat that we have harvested and food that we've foraged and food that we've grown. Every meal becomes a little bit more special, and you can just slow down a little bit and appreciate it. And I guess sometimes I'm a little bit of a foodie and I like to take pictures of what we're eating, and not to show it off, but taking a picture feels like it's a way for me to recognize and acknowledge and say, this is really special. I feel this is really special. And this meal will never be repeated, right? This meat from that animal is unique. And I certainly won't have all the other ingredients exactly the same ever again. So those meals become very special and fuels us for other adventures. And it's what we look forward to. It's our favorite time. That's our vacations and what is in my heart and memory, like our hardest hunts, are clear memories compared to, a vacation in Hawaii. Yeah, it was nice, but I could hardly tell you one memory from that. But I could tell you many very detailed memories from hunts that felt like they were the hardest, the most arduous. Even a hunt where we didn't bring an animal back, that's such a clear experience and memory. So unless people start to experience that, it's hard to truly explain, but I hope I've shared some of what I've experienced.
Jody, I've been in Alaska for a week now, and I feel like every person I've met is a hunter or a fisher, and just a land of abundance that you live in. We went for a beautiful hike today, and there was berries everywhere. I would just love to talk to you about some of the different species that you hunt and the different terrain that you traverse when you're hunting for, say, a Dall sheep versus the elk that is in this room with us. I think that might have been archery, because I remember seeing a photograph of you recently with that. Yeah. So just kind of painting the picture for those listening. There's a good chance that there's other hunters out there listening who are really curious to hear more about hunting in Alaska. Mm-hmm.
Well, more locally, when we hunt our Sitka black-tailed deer or the elk that we hunted on the Edelin Island, it's very wet terrain. So if people look up the Southeast Alaska, the Tongass National Forest, it's rainforest. Like truly, literally, it rains a lot. The ground is wet. The bush is wet. But the bush and the berries and all the green, it grows, it thrives. And so when you don't have a trail, which is what is happening when we're hunting, there's not really a trail. Maybe you find a little deer trail here or there, but you get wet and muddy, and you have to manage that as you are also, spending long time out and looking and trying to keep your meat dry and cool when you get an animal down. And that's a fairly big contrast to, going further north in Alaska to hunt Dall sheep, where it's a lot drier. And you can still have some pretty good bushwhacking depending on where you're going, but a little bit more open space. And wherever you're hunting, you need to keep the wind in your favor so the animals don't smell you. That's, I think, a common regardless of what our climate is. But yeah, I would say those are two of the sort of brief descriptions of here and where we hunt up north.
Now, Jody, I was talking about coming back to Alaska next year and potentially being able to join you for a black bear hunt. And you shared some new knowledge with me that brown bear meat doesn't taste good at all. I had no idea. And so I just would like to talk to you about hunting for bear and what the meat tastes like, and then maybe some theories as to why brown bear meat isn't actually that delicious.
Yeah, hunting black bear in the spring is something we usually do somewhat from a boat and then try to, creep in. And we would hunt brown bear the same way, but black bears are generally eating grasses and things like that. And it just seems like brown bears are eating other things that are maybe a little more rotten. And the couple people I have talked to who have tried brown bear, either they just didn't know people generally don't eat it or were just curious themselves. They said it was inedible. So it's, I think, what they're eating. You are what you eat. Mm-hmm. I truly believe that. So I think what the brown bears are eating is what is making the meat so intolerable. Mm-hmm. I am interested, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, in, eventually hunting for a brown bear. And it's not something I'd really thought of before, because hunting was always about bringing home meat. Mm-hmm. But I feel like I'm, in this whole cycle, and, from upland bird hunting, grouse or maybe ptarmigan, to hunting deer and, picking berries. And I feel like I'm in this web, and it's appropriate to also hunt something like brown bear, cherish the hide, not to hunt it just for the sake of having a hide, to hunt it to be part of the full circle and not just cherry picking the animals that I want. And we're seeing, very high population in certain areas that we've seen black bear before. So it feels appropriate to help manage their numbers and appreciate a hide.
That's a great segue into what I was hoping to talk to you about next. Now, many hunters and fishers or anglers out there know already how much conservation is deeply tied to their heritage. But for someone listening out there who's like, I don't get it, how are hunting, fishing, and conservation at all related? Can you please indulge us and share some of your knowledge?
Yes, I feel like, to give an example, if somebody is really passionate about watching a particular bird in a particular habitat, if at some point that habitat is compromised, or there is a plan for the habitat to be compromised, or something is happening to that species of bird and they're getting sick or they're dying off, you would immediately want to engage and do something about the problem, try to resolve it and help maintain the habitat. And that's exactly what a hunter does. Although we're not just watching them, we are, harvesting an animal. We have the same love and respect and honor for the animals, for their health, for their long-term health, for their habitat. And that's where, since people have been hunting, you just naturally care more when it's really important and special to you. And you notice things are happening, in terms of conservation. You notice if the numbers are changing, or if the habitat is shrinking, or, the water sources are changing. You'll notice those things because you're out there in it, and it's something you do on a seasonal basis, an annual basis. And when you see those changes, there's a little bit of a reaction in your heart. Naturally, there's that next conservation step. Conservation, I think, has many, many facets. So if listeners were thinking, conservation is like one specific thing, just people that maybe don't want logging or don't want mining, it's a very, very broad area and so many ways to facilitate conservation. But if you don't care about it, if you're not involved in it, it's the conservation aspect, I think, won't happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I also wanted to just take a moment to share with folks that about 80% of the funding that state wildlife agencies use for conservation, it comes from hunters and anglers. You want to talk a little bit more about that, just because a lot of people don't know that much about, there's excise taxes on firearms and all that, and then that money goes to help in conservation, and that's been happening for over 80 years.
Yeah. Since there's been a fee for hunting licenses, that money is going back into conservation, and that could be, I think, from scientific studies, research, just getting more knowledge, all the way through to creating green pathways, to trying to stop habitat degradation, or areas from just being developed that are really delicate and special and important. And every hunting license, all firearms, ammunition, there's a huge percentage of that goes towards conservation. So even if people aren't hunters, but they are, doing target practice or shooting practice, there's a lot of that money that comes back to conservation, which, well done for the founders of that movement and making those decisions. That's pretty good foresight.
Hi folks, my name is Chris and I'm the artist and co-founder at Explorer Maps. My brother Greg and I produced our first map about 11 years ago, doing the map of Montana, and our list of maps has grown from 1 to our current tally of over 65. I've been drawing and painting for a long, long time, starting as an advertising illustrator in the 80s back in Canada, to exhibiting wildlife and landscape oil paintings in East Africa through the 1990s. But I find that what I'm doing now with Explorer is the most rewarding project I've ever been involved with, mostly because it's a family business, and helping to grow that business gives me a real sense of purpose. We've even got our daughter Becca in on the action, making short documentaries and videos. She's just done one of Costa Rica. And my wife Ness will be finding new markets for our Explorer products when we move back to Kenya in the summer. So that'll be great fun. On the topic of connecting people in place, hopefully these maps bring back memories of great holidays and fun with family and friends. And it makes people want to get out there and connect or reconnect with these places. Do I have a favorite map? I definitely do not have a favorite map. They're all my favorites because they're like my children. I love them all equally. How's that for a diplomatic answer? Anyway, thanks for listening.
Hi, this is Vanessa, Chris's wife. Which map will you get to help you treasure your own special times? Please be sure to use the promo code Mandela for a discount when you visit explorermaps.com.
We are here on the edge of the Tongass National Forest in southeast Alaska with Jody Dixon. We're recording the Trail Less Traveled today right here in Juneau, Alaska. And Jody has been living here for 20 years. She is a yogi. She has a yoga studio here. She's also a hunter, and she is a professional whitewater kayaker, or at least she did that professionally for 7 years, and it took her all over the world. I would like to talk to you about that part of your life and how you got into kayaking, and maybe you can share some tips with the people listening, because a lot of my listeners are in Missoula, and we have a play wave in town, and we've got some amazing rivers that come through. You've paddled the Lochsa. Missoula's where I discovered you could get paid to guide whitewater, and that took me on my journey the last 15 years, and it's something that I most certainly feel passionate about as well. So could you tell us a little bit about that part of your life?
Yeah, that takes me back to high school, where we had a gym teacher who was a whitewater kayaker, and just for 1 week we did whitewater kayaking in the pool, and I really fell in love with it. And there was a wonderful local club that had boats and kayak night in the pool once a week through the winter, so I had a wonderful opportunity to get down my role. And then, even as a young person, most of the club were adults, but they were really wonderful and welcoming. And when spring came, they mentored me and took me out on the rivers. And not long after that, I ended up being interested in starting whitewater slalom racing. And so I did some whitewater slalom racing for a couple of years, and that took me to different parts of Canada, and I made the Canadian national team and went and traveled in Europe and went to some of the World Cups, and then I shifted to whitewater rodeo, and that again took me different places in the world. New Zealand world champs and Ecuador for guiding, and just different trips. And on all of these trips, yes, there's different rivers, but you're also meeting different people, and that was a really interesting way to engage with people. It's a small community, and that was always really fun. Is you see other whitewater kayakers in a town, and you're a traveler, but you can just gravitate, and all of a sudden there's a river trip planned the next day with the locals, and everybody's on board. So that was pretty special.
We did 2 podcasts today. My listeners might not realize this, but I work for National Wildlife Federation, and I help produce their National Wildlife Federation Outdoors podcast. Normally, I'm the person behind the scenes getting things done, but today I asked a couple questions, which was fun to get on the show. But I asked this question already today, and I'm going to ask it again. Talking about the meditation of whitewater kayaking, the meditation of hunting, how they parallel, and if you could kind of reflect on that a little bit.
Mm-hmm. I feel like the best description is a forced meditation. And one example is early in my whitewater kayaking career, we'd hiked our kayaks up this trail, and we're kayaking down the Astoria River. And I had a spray deck, this is the thing that goes over the cockpit and keeps the water out of your kayak. I went through a wave, and the wave kind of smashed the spray deck down, and so I was getting water in my boat, and then when your boat fills up with water, you can't really maneuver. So I ended up going for a really nasty swim, and finally, when my buddy helped me get my gear and me together, there's no point to warm up. There's no like, okay, we'll kind of like, loosen up and, get back into the rhythm. It was like, when you get back in your boat, like, it's go time, and there's another, whatever mile of river, and then you have to get the eddy at the end, because there's a really nasty canyon that nobody paddles. Like, it's not navigable. So the consequences are high, and like, what I'm about to do is totally within my abilities, but the confidence level is just blown. Even though I didn't do something wrong or, make a bad decision, I just had gear failure. But even so, like, just being shooken up, and then having to just like, you have to pull it together right now. Like, you have to paddle the rest of the river. To hike back out the other way is like, it'd be a couple days. Like, we're not prepared for that. So talking about forced meditation, right now you have to focus, or there's huge consequences. Like, that was an amazing experience to realize I could do that. I could focus and do exactly what was needed and stay on target. So I feel like that was like one of my first experiences of like, okay, like, this is the real deal. There are real consequences if you lose focus. And although not every hunting experience has got those kinds of consequences, you're generally, I feel like a lot of our hunts here in Southeast and up in northern or central Alaska, I should say, there's a lot of consequences. You're remote. You are pushing your limits, going farther, staying out longer. And then when you get an animal down, you're packing really heavy weight, 75, 85, sometimes 100 pounds. My husband often carries, more than that. He's always carrying more than me, but, a half to 2/3 of our weight in our backs. So it's all you can do to keep going. And again, it's not a consequence to stop and take a break, but it's this forced meditation of, I can do this. One more step. I can do this. I can make it to that log, and then we'll sit for half a minute. I can do this. I can get to that rock. And I think so much of our lives lack these opportunities to push ourselves. And I think it's a natural human thing. You want life to be easier so you can survive, because way back, survival was really hard. And so you wanted to increase your chances of survival, so you tried to make your life easier. But this pendulum has swung so far to life being so easy and things being so instant, and that we don't know how to suffer. And a little suffering, I think, is good for our soul and our character. I mean, not emotional suffering, but physical challenge, and not just a little, but like really feel some discomfort. We're human, we're resilient, you'll get over it. And those kinds of experiences are what keep those memories just seared in your heart and your mind.
That's the voice of Jody Dixon, and we're here in Jody's house in Juneau, Alaska. She's been living here for 20 years. She's a hunter, a yogi, has a background in professional whitewater kayaking, but she also is an ambassador for Artemis Sportswomen. So I wanted to make sure we set aside a moment for you to talk about what you do with Artemis Sportswomen. And, for someone out there listening who's interested, guess what? There's a good chance that there's also an ambassador in your state.
Yeah, exactly. Artemis is a wonderful organization of a large number of volunteer ambassadors. We all do this for free for a variety of reasons. For me, I feel like why I do this, I'll get to what it is I do, but why I do it is I feel like it has been so transformative in my life, and I've had an amazing life and amazing experiences. So to step that bar up even more through hunting is awesome. And I also realize it is completely because my husband has shared his information with me. And especially for women, if they do not have a family member or partner that they can learn to hunt with, I think it's extremely difficult to start to learn, to get out there and start doing it. Not to mention be successful and bring something home. And so I feel far from a super experienced hunter. There's just so much you can keep learning. But I feel like I have enough to share to be helpful. And through Artemis, I have the opportunity to offer events, and sometimes it's something more casual in town, some wild food that we've harvested with a campfire and just conversation and making connections between people who are interested, other ladies who are interested in hunting too. I took some gals out grouse hunting this year, and also a kind of a test run on how they could start getting into deer hunting, and just offering ladies an opportunity to learn and to understand that there's other women that want to learn, and that together you could combine your skills and go and do these things. You don't have to feel like you have everything. You don't have to have every skill set or every piece of knowledge. If you have some and you combine that with someone else's complementary skills, you can just get out there and do it. And you might not be successful. That's okay. There's many, many hunts that we go out and we don't bring something back. But the important part is that you're getting out. And I think that's a lot easier if you have some partners to go with.
Jody, I was hoping that we could talk a little bit about yoga. That's a pretty broad question. I mean, it might seem for some that it's just like, oh, yoga, we'll talk about it. But there's many different paths. So I'd like to talk to you about some of the paths that you've traveled in your life.
I feel like yoga has been something that, looking back, it was something that I was using as a activity initially just to, stretch my body, and, I think it's good for me, and yeah, it does feel good. Like, okay, this is a good thing for me to do. And then getting a little further into a yoga practice and, reading more and learning more about the philosophy and some of the, spiritual aspects. And now looking back on all of it, it was a method for me to seek connection, to seek just the greatest, spiritual connection. And it's definitely not what got me into it. And it's definitely something, as I, taper, and my yoga practice doesn't look like, it's not on a yoga mat really that much anymore. It's much more about paying attention to my breath and making sure I have time for meditative moments in my day. But it was always a time for seeking that connection with something that, doesn't really have appropriate words. We use the word spiritual, but that can have a lot of different, meanings or context for people. And I feel like the spiritual connection that I have sought is, it's just, there's no words, and it comes in different forms. And I think that's why I love to be outside, is it's a spiritual connection, just being outside and being fully present with everything living around me, and realizing that I'm a part of all of it, and that I want to be a part of all of it. I don't want to separate myself from this wild, amazing, planet. And I definitely seek that. And that's where I think for me, hunting trips where we don't bring something back, there's still a spiritual opportunity. There's still that opportunity to just be out there observing and being totally present.
That's beautiful. It really resonated with me what you said about the practice not necessarily being on the mat. I feel like that's kind of the path that I'm on right now, with a very busy summer, with wildlife conservation, and then getting on the water. For me, I find my union with my breath and my focus when I'm running big whitewater. And one of my favorite sutras is second sutra, Yogas Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Yoga is the cessation of the fluctuations of the mind. There's many ways you could translate that, but for someone out there listening, I don't think you necessarily need to box it up. Like, what is it in your life where you have that awareness and coming back to being present? Martial arts, painting, gardening, there's many different forms of it,
Exactly.
The hardest part about yoga, if you want to go to a class, is just showing up.
Exactly. And having preconceived notions, if you were just to kind of separate yoga from, I have to be flexible, to I'm going to go do this thing that's kind of, good for my body and should be kind of good for my heart and mind. And you have very loose definitions. I think it makes it a lot easier to walk in and just to know that everybody else has loose definitions as well. Nobody cares if you're flexible.
Yeah, no one cares. It has nothing to do with being able to touch your toes. It's amazing how often people are like, I'm not good at it. I can't. And it's nothing to do with that. We all have a different reason that we show up.
Yeah, exactly. And exactly, someone says, oh, I'm not good at yoga. I'm like, that's a perfect reason to come. I want people who are not good at yoga to come to class. Mm-hmm. If somebody says they're really good at yoga, then they don't need to come to my class. Just go live your enlightened life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, wonderful, Jody. Thank you so much for taking the time and energy to join me on the Trail Less Traveled.
You are welcome. It has been my pleasure.
I'd like to end your show with 3 bits of advice that you could share with whoever's listening out there.
I would love to encourage people to step outside of their comfort zone in wild places. And that could be something as simple as just walking where there's not a path, or walking to a new place, or challenging your body just physically a little bit more than you normally would. And to to enjoy a moment where you're still. So yes, challenge your body, but also have a moment where you're just observing the things around you. Smell, see, listen, feel. If there's wet moss, feel the wet moss. And you might feel a little bit kooky, but I think those moments are really special and just help us so much on every level of our body.
Namaste, Missoula. Mandela here, your host of the Trail Less Traveled, coming to you from, once again, the Missoula International Airport. This week's show was recorded on location in Juneau, Alaska, on the edge of the Tongass National Forest, which encompasses 17 million acres. It's our largest national forest. And I am asking you to speak up on behalf of the Tongass and the efforts that are being made to keep the Tongass roadless in order to protect the old-growth forest that still remains. The Trail Less Traveled is the Trail 1033's locally harvested adventure radio series. The show airs every Sunday night at 6, and you can stream it live online at trail1033.com. If you missed the show, check out the podcast. We are incredibly excited to be collaborating with Explorer Maps, a small family business based in Missoula, Montana. Explorer Maps and the Trail Less Traveled are working together to bring cartography alive through storytelling, conservation, culture, history, and art. Learn more by visiting exploremaps.com. That's it for this week's adventure, my friends in Missoula and around the world. But until next week, please remember, living in Missoula is a privilege, and with privilege comes responsibility. Please get informed, get engaged, and speak up on behalf of wildlife and wild places. For those who are still listening, I just wanted to remind you that for the past few months I have been in the studio working on a didgeridoo album with my good friend Steve Saroff. We just released our first single, and we're not going to ask you to buy anything. You can support our music by simply adding this song to your playlist on Spotify or Apple Music. Search Didgeridoo River Meditation under the artist's name, Mandela
von Ihren. Thank you so much for supporting our music, and stay tuned for the next single that we will be releasing on July 19th.